Welcome everyone to our last set of breakout sessions at this year's 2021 Pittsburgh TechFest. We're so excited to have you all here. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, Amazon as our main event sponsor, IQ Inc., SoftWriters, Aerotech, and General Dynamic Mission Systems as our participating sponsors. Without them, this couldn't have been possible, and it made it a free event for everyone to join. Which we're really excited to have you here. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Erika and Denise.
Thanks, Taylor. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Pittsburgh TechFest Day 2. My name is Denise Hardman. I'm a distinguished UX designer at Dick's Sporting Goods, and I'm here today with my partner in crime, Miss Erika Green, a distinguished product manager at Dick's Sporting Goods. And today we're going to talk about the aspect of before build, measure, learn, the art of lean experimentation. And just some general housekeeping items before we dive in. We do have some awesome content to cover today. And we know that you guys are going to have a lot of feedback and questions. I would highly encourage, just for the sake of time, if you do have feedback or questions as we go through these slides, please be encouraged to pop those in the chat. We will have a Q&A session as a follow-up, and we will definitely get to those and get those answered. Also want to call out, feel free to use reactions as we go through these slides. This is the first time that Erika and I are presenting on this particular topic, so getting some preliminary feedback from you guys as an audience is much appreciated. And lastly, we do love seeing your faces. So if you want to go on camera, please be encouraged to do so. Obviously still optional, but especially for the Q&A, that's really nice as we end out the session. And with that too, if you can be mindful of keeping your audio on mute, just so we don't get any weird noise feedback and whatnot happening throughout the duration of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking. And I'm going to go and hand it over to Erika to get us started.
All right, well, welcome everyone. And I know we are the group right before your lunch. So hopefully you enjoy the session, and we'll just get on the way here. So we're going to talk about the art of lean experimentation. In a lot of today's industry and many of us on the roll today, what we aspire to do is build better products. Would love to hear from folks in the chat. Tell us what products you're working on. Tell us about the industry you're in, and we'll come back to that and see what our participants today are involved with on a day-to-day basis. So when we talk about building better products, sometimes our process heavily favors focusing on the solution and the output, but not necessarily how we got there, and more importantly, where are we going? What are we trying to do? When focusing solely on the output in this framework, we fall into traps that lead us to long lists of projects, not having a thorough understanding of the why or what's important to the customer. What do they want? What do they need? Feature factories end up leading to being driven by how much you can actually deploy in a given time, and it becomes about the quantity instead of the quality and actually meeting the needs of your end customer. This type of framework actually leaves no time, no room to iterate, nor is there room to really understand what works and doesn't work, and most importantly, the why. So before we move into the meat of the presentation, Denise, what do we have for industry or products from our participants today?
Yeah, we have a little bit of a shy audience, but that is not a problem. So Kelly shared video on demand is something that they're working on. And I do know, we've got more. Okay, the audience is getting less shy. So John shared teaching students, Donna, project collaboration software, Michael, content services initiative at Nielsen. So very, very cool stuff. Nice. I know some other folks, Dwayne, you've worked in labor management, internal employee applications. We've got IT recruiting. So a lot of really good stuff in terms of products that people are working on here today.
Awesome. And what you'll find as we get into this conversation is that regardless of the type of product or the industry you're in, or if you're, I heard you say somebody is teaching students, this is applicable in everyday life in the work that you do with all of your customers, regardless of the type of customer they are. So hopefully you find something here that you can actually take with you and use back with your team or within your organization. So let's first talk about continuous learning. Instead of starting your focus on the solutions and the output, we really want to talk about this concept of consistent feedback loops and learning and pivoting along the way based on those results. Start by defining your outcome to help identify the problem or opportunity you'd like to explore. Typically, your goal is going to be to increase, decrease, or improve something. And when you use language like that, you steer away from starting with the solution and actually turn it into your customer-facing problem. And then how are you going to measure it? What does success look like? And that's the important piece of this learning is what are you going to take with you along the way, and how are you going to know if something's working or not? You're setting yourself and your team up for the concept of continuous iteration, feedback loops with your customers directly. This empowers the team to explore several solutions they'll learn about in the process, as opposed to really just focusing on a single solution that may or may not actually work in the long run. In this continuous framework, we're actually never done. Your feature is never done, your product is never done. It's intended to keep pushing you to go above and beyond and think outside of the obvious for the problems you're trying to solve. All right, so this visual hopefully is very familiar to many of you. It's a staple in the product and design practices. We often refer to this when we're talking to our teams about how to get from point A to point B and what does continuous look like. It's a great way to visualize what can happen along the two product journeys. Both journeys end up getting to the same outcome, which is a car. That's the deliverable, that's the product that both journeys are trying to put out. But how you get there is much, much different. So let's take a closer look at what this entails. I'm going to talk to you about the build first, learn later model. So in this model, the team is gathering evidence and building feature by feature to deliver a big bang all at once, product at the end. When you do this, the process is very linear. It does not leave room for any deviation. You set out with a plan from the onset and you complete that exact plan. You don't steer from it. This can be very costly, it's time consuming, and ultimately you won't know if you've addressed your customer's needs. In some instances, you may not even have the middle two phases and you'll attempt to go from the wheel to a car all in one shot. I will tell you this typically does not work, and you have a very frustrated group along the way. And then what it happens to do is the usability for your customer value doesn't exist. You actually don't know if what you're going to put out there is going to be useful to them. So what ends up happening is you put these parts out individually, and then they have to wait for the entire whole before it's usable. They can't use, the base of the car without anything else. It's not going to give them anything. So you eventually deliver this product to your end customer, and it seems to be satisfactory, but the team has spent a lot of time making a lot of assumptions, laboring over the build, while ignoring the user all along the process. So I want to walk through a real world example. Actually, Denise and I worked very closely together on this example that we'll look at here in a minute. It is a Dick's Sporting Goods e-commerce site example. Happened many years ago when we were still very much so in a waterfall framework. So how does this build first, learn later framework typically, what does it look like? So working in waterfall, you pass the work off, it's separated into silos with teams doing their part, but not really talking to each other or collaborating in a way that exposes more opportunity. We used a number of out-of-box vendor-provided solutions, which didn't leave for any customization or differentiating experiences for our customers. Not to say all vendor solutions are like that, but in this case, our hands were tied. We had no option but to use what they provided us. We worked with very long deadlines. 6 to 12 months was the typical for one release, a big bang release, if you will. Sometimes it was longer, depending on the defect list. And it left a lot to be desired by our customers. We fell behind the competitive curve. We ended up in a redundant game of catch up while continuing to acquire tons of technical debt and design debt. This led to unhappy, frustrated customers. We were providing them a predetermined list of features without addressing the needs, what their problem or friction points were. We were telling them, here, use this. This is what we want you to use, versus actually listening to them and understanding the jobs to be done. Like, what were the important things that they needed to focus on and be able to do. By the time the release went out the door, we incurred a number of defects and injected more unintentional friction points in the journey, which led to a year of stabilization rather than future iterations on the product. So the example here is of our shopping cart redesign on dix.com. Like I said, we did this several years ago, maybe 5 or so years ago. In this example, we certainly improved the UI. I don't think anybody will argue that the example on the left is not really pleasing to the eye. But did we actually meet our customer needs is the question that we left at the end of this. Much of the detail for the cart on the right was done based on what our vendor could allow us to do with the page templates. Everything was templated. All of their customers use the same for their e-commerce sites. We were constrained by their capabilities, and so we did very little customer research to inform what our customers actually find valuable at the start of their purchase journey. We just kind of went with it and said, all right, well, this is what the vendor can do. So we kept all the original features from the screen on the left. We moved them around, maybe changed how they look, but we never actually asked ourselves what our customers thought up front. We never went out to them to get their input before we started building. So we hit the development cycle. We realized at that point, we actually needed to do some usability testing to see if we had friction points. Unfortunately, because of where we were at, we were so far into development and we had a date that had been set that we were marching towards, that many of our findings could not be incorporated prior to the release. So we went out with a better looking product in our opinions, but we had some shortcomings with our customers at that point, and we missed some major opportunities with them. So what's the point? What's the so what with this? When you work in this model, you have several risk factors that you have to be aware of. The first one, typically for most companies, is going to be impact to revenue. Building stuff is expensive. When you consider the labor, the technology involved in the effort, nothing is ever free. It always takes time and effort from somebody on your team to work through it. When you build without identifying and validating your risks and assumptions, you're really introducing a high level of risk, delivering something that won't actually produce value. The second, which is so important as we talk about human-centered design and we talk about customers, is the customer lifetime value. They are the lifeline to your business. The focus should be building those things that are most desirable, usable, feasible, viable, and ethical. Don't forget that as a element to consider when you're talking about customer lifetime value. You really have one shot with your customers. If you go out with an ultimately really bad experience, it will impact the loyalty to your brand and really the trust factor that they have with you. Employee morale is a huge risk. So imagine you're working on a team and you're just churning out work, and you execute over and over without being able to innovate and insert your ideas into the fold or learn anything along the way. An unfulfilling job is the fastest way to send your employees running for the hills. We've created these instances in a journey like this where they just become a factory, and they're just doing what they're told, order takers, if you will. And so when you're looking at that, you really want to think about, okay, how can I take these bright individuals I have and actually put them out there to solution and come up with many options that will help solve the customer problem in the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Denise now. We've looked at that first flow of what happens, and she's going to take us through the learning first, build later model.
Awesome. Thank you, Erika. So I'm going to shift gears here. Erika did a great job articulating what the heck is happening on the product journey in that first instance where we have those big bang releases, and we get to kind of ignore our users the whole time as we're trying to build this vehicle. so to speak. So I'm going to talk about what happens when you kind of embrace a model of continuous learning that eventually leads to incrementally kind of building and understanding your product space. And this visual is a great demonstration of that, where you kind of start with the skateboard and you're talking to your users, you're then delivering on the scooter, eventually to a bike, a motorbike, and then to the car. And you can kind of see the emoticons in the process as the user is walking with you along this journey. You're continuously optimizing their satisfaction all the way to the point where, hi, caramba, like this is exceptional. I'm super elated, super happy to get that car. So you might ask me, Denise, hello, the product journeys, they both produce this automobile at the end of the day. What's the difference? The difference, my friend, is in the details. And let's say we pop the hood on both of those cars. Let's say the one Erika talked about in that version runs on gasoline. Mine's an electric vehicle. Maybe the one in Erika's journey that she talked about has a really good cruise control feature, but mine has an autopilot and driver assist program. I could go on and on with features that might increase user satisfaction based on identifying some of their core needs and frustration points. But the point is here at the point in this journey, continuous learning helped us deliver a better product at the end of the day. Next slide. So this is where we're getting into, ta-da, the art of lean experimentation. And what the heck is it all about? And I wanted to take a moment to kind of dissect what we mean when we say lean experimentation. So if you go to the next slide, lean is really about being scrappy and quick. I know Erika had mentioned, impact to revenue and initial investment requests up front. Lean kind of takes that and pushes it to the side because it really values learning and incremental delivery. And the word experimentation, if we go to the next slide, is all about something we can validate. So typically in our space, regardless of your discipline, you're probably coming up with some form of a hypothesis that you want to test. And you're either going to validate the hypothesis, maybe it's debunked, you're proven wrong, and you kind of pivot and start somewhere new. But at the core of lean experimentation, that's really what we're talking about when we throw out those words. Next. So this is a framework that we've used at Dick's Sporting Goods within our technology group that is about learn first, build later. We refer to it as the double diamond oftentimes, but the idea here is pretty simple. Basically, you bring a group of people together. It might be software engineers, designers, product managers, probably some folks in your foundational areas and data and analytics, maybe security, operations. You've got business stakeholders. You're bringing all these people together who have stakes and an impact within your particular product domain, if you will. You do some form of scoping, you have a kickoff, and then you start what we call discovery. And discovery is just another term for being curious and exploring your space, testing the boundaries, learning what it is that is happening from an end-to-end experience. And a lot of times you'll lean into primary and secondary research methodologies to kind of start to collect a lot of that intelligence and evidence gathering. But the whole point is you're starting to identify opportunities in the space. And I mean, I've seen product teams within our technology group who identify 100 plus opportunities within any given product domain. It's kind of incredible. And the idea is that you start to prioritize those opportunities into top problems. And once you've identified top problems through whatever measures that your team chooses to implement, it might be impact, it might be feasibility, it might be time for that matter. But once you identify those, you start to go into what we call framing, which is kind of very similar to discovery, starting to crowdsource a lot of ideas in terms of potential solutions to solve those problems and opportunities. And very similar to discovery, you're taking and ingesting all of those solutions, and some could be so far-fetched, some could be so simple, and everything in between. You end up going through a prioritization exercise to kind of figure out from a solutions perspective, what might be the most viable to our business? What might be most desirable to our users? And how do we create that into like a usable end-to-end experience? So if you go to the next slide, this is really where the concept of experimentation starts to formulate. And I want this group to keep in mind when we talk about experimentation, this is typically happening before we're ever committing any code to the repository. So if we go to the next slide, just like Erika walked through our throwback example of the e-commerce website, I wanted to showcase a really compelling story that I was fortunate enough to kind of see this process unfold with our footwear service and experience product team. And the team created an application called ShoeRunner. And within our Dick's Sporting Goods brick and mortar stores, we have an area of the store where you can shop for footwear. We typically refer to it as a footwear deck. This team went through a continuous discovery process to basically create a digital aid in the form of a kiosk that could be placed in the footwear deck to allow our customers to grab a shoe, scan the barcode, and determine whether or not that shoe was available in the store and be able to request it so that an associate could grab it from the back and present it. So really, really cool space. If we go to the next slide, I'm just going to kind of talk through how this unfolded with the team. And one of the things I really admire from this team was when they first stepped into this domain, it was an evergreen space. They weren't sure, kind of what had been done. Not a lot had been done in terms of tech advancements in the space. And so they had to really figure out, what the heck do we mean when we talk about the end-to-end experience when servicing customers and when our associates are working to get customers shoes? So I would highly advise, if you are exploring a new space, be okay with learning the roles. This team spent about 2 weeks learning how to actually sell shoes. So they were engaging with customers whom we refer to as athletes, and they were working with associates whom we refer to as teammates. They were working with the teammates to understand how they use their handheld devices, what applications, allowed them to be able to do this work today. They also learned how inventory was managed in the back. So not only how to have a conversation with, an athlete, but then go retrieve the shoe and bring it back onto the sales floor and see if, it's the right fit, basically. So they did a ton of learn the role by doing, which I would highly recommend if you're new to any product space. And they also did a lot of observational activities where they would go to different footwear decks and they would just observe what's happening with our athletes, what's happening with our teammates. And what they found was 87% roughly of athletes entering our footwear deck actually knew what shoe they wanted. They didn't need to have this conversation around gait analysis or what's the right shoe for the right activity. What are these brands typically known for in terms of their shoe and the materials and so forth. They didn't need that. They had their own level of education and expertise they brought to the shoe deck. So what was really cool is they determined, an observation to say, hey, there's a certain kind of expectation as our athletes are coming onto the footwear deck. And what does that mean for the end-to-end experience? So if we go to the next slide. So I'm gonna ask you to kind of close your eyes and picture a scenario. I'm gonna give you a scenario here. So I'm an athlete. I'm coming to Dick's Sporting Goods to buy some shoes. It's back to school season. The store is busy, high traffic. The footwear deck is all abuzz. And I go and grab my shoe that I like, and I look around to find a teammate. And I see the teammate, and I see 3 other athletes waiting for that teammate's attention. So I walk over and I get in line. I get in line and I'm patiently waiting. And finally it's my turn. And I hand the teammate the shoe and I say, can I get this in a size 7? And the teammate takes out their handheld device and they take the shoe and they scan the barcode, and you're kind of like waiting in anticipation for, do they have my shoe or not at this moment in time? And if we go to the next slide, the teammate shakes their head and they say, I'm sorry, we don't have that shoe in your size in stock right now. And so it's kind of this like ultimate disappointment factor that I've invested time to walk around the footwear deck, find the right shoe. I wait in the queue, you know, wait patiently while other people kind of get serviced, and it's finally my moment and I'm told you don't have it. And I want to pull the group here, the audience, and say, has this ever happened to you? Likely it has, whether or not it's with Dick's Sporting Goods or another retailer. But what would you do in that situation? Would you, think about it. You're kind of like, what do I do? I've got 3 people behind me who are waiting to be serviced. This teammate is telling me they don't have it. What are my options? Do you go back and find another shoe and repeat the whole process again? Do you just leave the store and say, well, that sucked, and I intentionally didn't order this online because I wanted to touch it and feel it and try it on, and so I'm going to be salty for the next few weeks. So as you think about your experience in these real world situations, just curious what your guys' reactions are. So I don't know, Erika, if you're getting any comments on the chat.
We are. So a couple of people would actually try to find another location, another Dick's store that has it. Others would say, all right, I'm going to go somewhere else. And then we had one person say, I might try online too and see if I can find it.
Yeah. And you had expectations at that point when you walked in, and I know these are micro moments in time, but they add up. So if we go to the next slide, this was really a critical moment for the team because they were looking at the service model and really understanding the way that our athletes wanted to be serviced and how our current service model wasn't really conducive to that level of engagement. So the team had this bright idea of, what if we flipped our service model? What if we flipped the script? And what if we actually allowed our athletes to self-service to a certain degree on their own time, in their own way, and see whether the shoe they wanted was available and requested. So if we go to the next slide, this is the birth of the $100 experiment. And again, Erika had mentioned reducing investment. Lean experiments are all about the scrappy, I don't need a significant amount of financial investment to just validate some things. So what did this team do? This team went back to corporate and they said, hey, can I get an iPad? So they got an iPad and they put a UI on the iPad. Scan and request your shoe. Let's throw in a barcode graphic and this button that says request. Even though it didn't work on the back end, an athlete didn't know that. So they spent $100. They bought a cheap stand and some signage. They ordered some signage to be printed, and they went and built these makeshift kiosks around various Dick's Sporting Goods stores, and they wanted to see what would happen. So if we go to the next slide, apologize for the fuzzy image here, but this is an image of an actual athlete kind of talking to one of our UX researchers, and you can see like the kiosk itself, it looks like there's some like white paper and tape and like a little sign in the back. It was lean. It was lean in the best sense of the word. And what the team was doing is they were observing what was happening with this experience. They were validating their riskiest assumption, which the riskiest assumption for this team, before you go and invest in all these kiosks and put them in every Dick's Sporting Goods store across the country, was, will an athlete actually desire or want to use this kiosk? Does it solve a problem for them? And what the team found through their observations and research was athletes were comfortable with the thought of using a kiosk and didn't shy away from it. So if we go to the next slide, this is where the team actually through continuous learning was able to reduce their investment and time spend in trying to figure out what to build and iterating to informing what we need to build in our first version or iteration or MVP, if you will. And they did this in 60 days, which was super impressive. Next slide, please. Today, ShoeRunner's in, I believe, over 200 Dick's Sporting Goods stores across the country. We are seeing about 15% usage today, and this number will continue to scale as the team learns more about athlete behaviors and continues to deliver on outcomes that give more robust features in terms of that end-to-end experience. So I do have my notes here because I didn't want to botch this for the team. Currently, ShoeRunner allows athletes and teammates to view store availability with filters. You can also find similar products. So remember that case I talked about out of stock and it's like, oh, sorry, it's out of stock, too bad. Now you can see similar products. So if something new came in and it's really similar to the shoe that you wanted that's out of stock, you can actually look at that one instead. Very cool. Also, you can now request multiple shoes. So the days of like one shoe scan, one request, and then having to repeat the cycle if you don't like the fit or the way it looks or whatnot, now you can just request multiple shoes and the teammate will bring it out. And there's also a feature around wayfinding for teammates. So think about a situation, our footwear decks can be pretty big from a square footage perspective. Think about you as a teammate who's servicing an athlete. You've got 3 kiosks in the store, you know, how do you know which one to go to when that request happens? So wayfinding is a pretty cool concept as well. And next slide. So I wanted to talk about some of the benefits real quickly of learn first, build later. I have a car here. It's supposed to signify like exploring and, you know, going into new areas, if you will. The idea of embracing failure. So failure is learning, you know, if we were perfect in everything we did, how would we know how to optimize things over time? So I think the idea of embracing failure and leaning into being okay, being vulnerable and learning is a huge, huge benefit with learn first, build later. And next slide. User-centric. So that first journey Erika talked about, boy, could it have been less user-centric? As an example, it's a great way of showing what ignoring your users gets you in terms of a final delivery. So bringing that user along every step of the journey, I've seen product teams form wonderful relationships with their users who may actually be their peers and teammates to people they've never met before. But it's a wonderful thing to see how those learnings really lend to really effective quality builds. And next slide. Product valuation is another thing that learn first, build later is a true enabler of. So when you think about understanding viability to the business, understanding what's most desirable to your users and turning that into something that is actually usable, this process lends to that in very, very wonderful ways. And last here, next slide, customer lifetime value. Erika mentioned this. I would just say, think of all the brands and the products and experiences that you tend to be loyal to and ask yourself, why are you loyal to those products and services? And a lot of times it's because, you know, the company's listening to you and they're producing things that are relevant and valuable, and it may solve some problems that you have day to day. It might just be something that makes you feel good and you know, has impacted your life in a certain way. But I think at the end of the day, you know, having a good service model and how we learn about what drives those desires is really critical. And next slide. So we wanted to kind of start to end this talk with some best practices. So like, okay, so what does it all mean? Like, how can I apply it? We've gone through some examples today, but if there's anything you take away from today, these are kind of the running list of things. So one, it's a team effort. Working in silos and leaning into handoffs just creates just such an anti-collaboration environment, if you will. The team effort, you know, we believe in speaking each other's languages from a discipline perspective, kind of cross-training, cross-collaborating, and learning new stuff all the time, and kind of challenging the aspect of what's possible. So team effort 100%. Be kind to your users. So I know this is like super obvious, but sometimes your users aren't going to use your product or service in the way that you would intend them to. And sometimes that can be super frustrating because you put your heart and soul into everything you do day to day to produce said product or experience. But be kind. Understand that even though you guys may not always be on the same page, they're here for you to be able to learn and make their lives better. So be kind at the end of the day. And next, failure is learning. I'm not going to dwell on this one. We've already talked about it plenty of times, but just understand that failure is not a dirty word. It is okay, and it's a critical part of the continuous learning process. And lastly here, encourage ideas from everywhere. So some of the best ideas I've had as a designer have come from non-designers. Maybe it's somebody I've worked with in the business who's a stakeholder. It could be an engineer who just approaches problem solving a little bit differently than I do. So I would just encourage you guys to keep your eyes and ears open in terms of the potential places where ideas may come from. And I'm going to hand it off to Erika to round us out.
Okay, so we wanted to end here with some tips on how to get started. If you're not doing this today, what's the best way to really go about getting this spun up in your organization or with your team? So the first thing is you need an agent of change. You need an advocate and a partner, usually in your leadership team, that can help support the teams if this is a new way of working for you. There's an aspect of change management here. And so you need somebody that can really help you through that. And that person could be you. So think about that. Think about, somebody that can influence and really start to challenge the ways of working in a very positive way. So regardless of who it is, what's important is having somebody that will support and encourage the experimentation for the teams, and a lot of patience, take time, help the teams through it. So you need to keep it simple, and you need to start small. Experiments do not have to be these laborious projects that are super expensive and thought, all the way out, coded and shipped to production. Some of the best experiments, and you saw that with ShoeRunner, are simple. They're not even introducing a piece of code or technology at the start. They have a dead end, and it's really to create a change in experience or a new experience and see how it does. So try it, go small, go simple. And what you think is probably an MVP that you could start with, you can probably even go even leaner. So challenge yourself to really scale back on that experiment to learn something. There's various methods you can use. So don't pick one and only stick to that. Try these various methods that are out there. The different experiment types that our teams typically use include customer interviews, low fidelity and or high fidelity prototypes, walking skeleton tests, concierge tests, Wizard of Oz tests, smoke test. We have imposter judo, high hurdle, and then of course, optimization or A/B testing. Sometimes you can use these together. You can mix and match. Sometimes you need one. Sometimes, depending on the problem, there's a very specific thing that you're trying to learn. And so if you haven't used these, do some research on them. Happy to answer questions at the end about what these different types of models are. But pick one or pick a few and give it a try. So creating a safe space for failure. Denise has talked about this. I'm gonna stress it one more time because this is so important to the success of working in this model. Failure is not bad. If you've learned what not to do, you've learned something meaningful. So it's important to nurture that environment where teammates feel like it's okay if the experiment fails and doesn't go according to plan. And this is where your agent of change is really gonna be a support system for this team. The fastest way to tax the morale and stifle creativity is for someone to feel like they're going to be reprimanded or penalized for trying something that didn't work. So definitely give them the space to fail. Celebrate those failures. As long as you learn something, it's not a loss. Denise talked about, collective teams being involved in the teamwork that really goes into these things being a success. If you want buy-in from the whole team on what you're trying to accomplish, then it's critical to include your product management, UX design, engineering, perhaps other partners within your technology team, and then your stakeholders. Don't forget about your stakeholders. They would love to learn through these experiments and work with you. You'd be surprised about the unexpected value that actually comes from including the whole team. We've seen teammates develop a human-centered understanding of the problem space that had never worked in that kind of discipline before. We've seen creative solutions to try in future experiments or pivot points where maybe we need to change direction. We've seen differences in how we might tackle building the actual solution in the end based on what we've learned, and empathy for the customer. We've seen huge benefits in our teammates understanding the pain or the joy that a customer gets from what they're going through. And then ultimately your team bonds will actually strengthen from working together and solving the problem together. Finally, celebrate what you learn, large or small. I say learn because you shouldn't just celebrate the successful experiments. You should celebrate everything that you try. Knowledge is power. Get your teams excited about, talking to their customers, what they are learning. Do it often, and you'll see great things that come with that. All right, so we're going to wrap up here and then go to Q&A. First, quick special thank you to a few members from our Dick's Sporting Goods team, Christina Dunning, Sam Puster, and Justin Fishground. They are our footwear product team that is or has worked on ShoeRunner. So they allowed us to showcase all of their great work today. And Rebecca Houlihan, she's our Director of Internal and Corporate Comm, and so she helped us get ready for today. We are hiring. So we have a link here, go to dix.com/careers. We have roles in product managers, engineers, UX designers, leadership within our infrastructure and security teams. So definitely check us out. If you know anybody, we'd love to talk to anybody interested. All right, with that, let's go to Q&A. And so at this time, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat or raise your hand. And I'm gonna actually stop sharing so we can see faces as we do the Q&A.
And we do have a couple questions that popped up in the chat as we went along. I know Dwayne asked, how much time passed before the company realized the waterfall approach didn't work?
Well, it'll certainly depend on the company. What I would say is the point at where we started rethinking kind of our strategy and what the future looks like specific to e-com, I'll just speak to that, was about the time that we decided to in-source a lot of our technology and move away from the vendor at the time. There comes a point where you need to be able to innovate. You need to be able to understand what your customer needs, and a template that your vendor is providing may not afford you that opportunity. And so that for us was the timing. We started this transformation. I mean, we technically started our insourcing of our applications back in, I think, 2015, if I recall correctly. And by the end of the start of 2017, we had insourced all of our e-commerce sites, and by 2018 we were working in product teams and lean experimentation.
Awesome. Shout out and thank you to John for posting the book link. The user experience team of one definitely speaks to some of the content that we talked to today. Next question here, Michael asked, does any of your advice change in a B2B environment? Often the users are specialized professionals that you may not have easy access to. Also, often the person making the buy decision isn't the same as the actual user. This is a really good question.
Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
I mean, my initial reaction to this is no company is created the same in terms of not only their culture, but how they operate their business. And there's a constant evolution and kind of flux in place as we adapt to like an ever-changing climate when it comes to the market. So I can speak to this from a Dick's Sporting Goods perspective. Just leaning into a framework and saying like, here's the framework, use it. We've had to adapt so many phases of that framework as we've undergone change management practices. We've really leaned into continuous learning and this whole concept when it comes to driving what frameworks work for us best. And I will say that framework will not look the same 5 years from now. Even a year from now, there's going to be certain pivots that we make. So in the B2B world, you're kind of the expert in understanding your end-to-end experience and that journey to get from point A to B. So I'm always the person to kind of want to get the big picture view and then figure out where are the opportunities, where does this break down, and how can we adapt this framework to make it work for us? And I don't know, Erika, if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you're spot on. I think the thing to note is that regardless of the industry, regardless of your customer types, right? We also have internal customers. We have teammates that we support in merchandising and e-com, et cetera. So you can apply the same practices. And when it's difficult to kind of be able to work with those customers directly, you do have to get a little crafty. So we've even partnered with agencies or companies that focus in different persona groups that can actually give us access to those people if you can't get to them directly. So there's definitely options to do that.
Awesome. And I see, Erika, you responded to Dwayne and listed some of the experimentation models. So that's awesome. Any other questions here today? You guys have been a really nice audience. So Michael, do you want to kind of talk about what you just dropped in the chat?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, we're at Nielsen. We're doing a lot of early phase customer development, and in my previous company, it was also a B2B company. It was a startup. In my previous company, we were very lucky to have some access to expert users who really had strong opinions about how they did their business, how they lived their lives, and we could rely on them. And sometimes some things I've seen is, people, you said, don't fixate too much on one technique, right? And something I have seen some of is people will do a lot of customer interviews where they'll call up prospects and you'll say, hey, we have this concept, would you like to talk to us about it? And they say, sure, right? And they have a conversation, right? And we tell them all our great ideas. And they say, those sound awesome. We love those ideas. Sounds great. And then, we kind of go into the development process and maybe, get some feedback as we're going. And then when it comes time to put it out into the market and buy, they're like, this is nice. Yeah, but we're not actually going to pay for it, right? We were happy to take a meeting and have a call, but when it comes to actually committing, a large sum of money, and with B2B, right? It's not a purchase decision like, am I gonna drop $6 on a coffee? It's a purchase decision like, am I gonna commit $1 million to a subscription that's gonna last 3 years, right? And so getting it wrong is a problem, so yeah, I definitely think there's a lot to learn here and a lot that can be done better, but it's challenging. Yeah.
I think what we've experienced, Michael, with that is the agents of change in the right areas of the organization help to mitigate some of those roadblocks and hurdles, because a lot of what you just mentioned is where are we putting investment dollars and what are we prioritizing? And at the end of the day, there's expectations for what that means in terms of outputs, and you know, being misled to think that like something is going to happen and then have it pulled out, you know, the rug from underneath you is super frustrating, especially from a kind of employee morale standpoint that Erika talked about, because we like to think that the work we do is driving incremental value for the company, whether it's their bottom line, whether it's their internal operations, whether it's making associates' lives easier in our day-to-day through some of the technology that we build. That's all critical to the bigger picture.
I think too, I'll just add to that, there is something about taking that customer and actually putting it in their hands to do, right? So you mentioned like asking them if they'd want something. And of course, you know, everybody wants everything until you say, okay, give me your credit card number. Give me your social security number, right? Like when you start to ask them for very sensitive personal things and ask them to do it themselves, it starts to kind of make them rethink, well, wait a second. No, I would never put that into a form. Why do I need that to sign up for a credit card in the store, right? So you have to start to think there, and those are some examples where we're talking about PII and things that are, you know, they're going to be very serious about, but it happens even, you know, with smaller scale things too. As soon as you ask them to physically do something with their own money or with their own actions, they rethink it, because now they are the ones that are accountable for whatever happens next. Other questions, comments? Denise Kelly really likes her cat portrait.
Do the reveal here. There's actually 2 of them. Oh my gosh. Yes, those are my little criminals at home.
Well, thank you guys so much. If anyone has any questions, we can connect you guys with Erika and Denise, or you can just reach out to us and we can help you out with anything you need. But if there's no other questions, I just want to thank you guys so much for presenting today. And this is the last session of the conference. So thank you everyone for joining us for this 2-day conference of the Pittsburgh Tech Fest. Hopefully next year we'll be in person, because I know this conference really thrives in the in-person networking facilitating. So we're really excited to be planning that for next year so far. Be sure to check out our sponsors before you log off for the day, because I know it's Friday and everyone is ready to enjoy their weekend. But with that, thank you again, and thank you to our presenters for today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.